Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. So every Pokemon generation has some sort of influence on the ones that come afterward, whether it be through returning mechanics, changes to the battle system, and so on. But recently in our podcast community Discord server, I was posed the question on which generation I thought was the most influential of them all. Honestly, it's a really tough question to answer, when you exclude Generation 1 for obvious reasons. And I think that answer has certainly changed over time. The first answer that came to my mind was Generation 3. It was a controversial generation at the time of its release due to it severing all ties to previous regions, not allowing for direct Pokemon transfer from past gens, and generally changing the overall structure of the Pokemon games for the next 20 years. This is the generation where the main story became far more plot-heavy, the progression was more linear than past titles, and it refined the Pokemon formula to its familiar structure that we know it by today. But I also realized there's little else that Gen 3 did that has stuck around. The only extra feature that I can think of are contests, which lasted for one more generation before quickly being discarded aside from remakes. But then I thought, what about Generation 4? It was the first generation to introduce Wi-Fi connectivity and features like the GTS, which are still used today, and the introduction of the physical special split was probably the most radical change made to the battle system that is unlikely to ever change. But at the same time, like Gen 3, there's a lot of features that never saw the light of day past Sinnoh. Surely there must be another generation with an even longer lasting impact. And then it hit me. That generation is Gen 6. Now, I have been very critical of Gen 6 in the past, and justifiably so in my opinion. It's still my least favorite generation due to how little it's fleshed out with heaps of issues that are hard to ignore, but when I thought about it, most of what Gen 6 did was laying down the foundation for the future of the series. Obviously, this is the generation that kicked the franchise forward into the 3D era of gaming, being the first generation to take the player off the 4-directional grid, and making nearly 1,000 3D models that are still being used in all Pokemon games nearly 10 years later. If you look at the games now, they're not all that different from how they were presented in Gen 6, up to Pokemon Legends Arceus at least. On the battle side of things, the Fairy type was introduced, quite nicely rounding out the type chart, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being the last type addition we ever see. But of course, Mega Evolution was the Spotlight mechanic introduced in this generation, and although they no longer exist in Generation 8, and I wouldn't bet on them coming back in any future games aside from the occasional remake or spin-off, the concept of Mega Evolution is still alive and well. Not only through new generational gimmicks that we've received, such as Z-moves and Dynamax, but also through regional variants which revisit classic Pokemon and revamp them in new exciting ways. This concept is what allows us to look forward to new Pokemon even in games like Legends Arceus, where normally you wouldn't expect anything new to be introduced. This was also the first generation to establish the new norm of introducing far fewer new species and instead focusing on revising old favorites. Mega Evolution itself may be dead, but the creative vision behind it has persisted, and likely will persist for quite a while. Even the concept of a Pokemon multiverse was established in this generation, quite literally leaving the door open for infinite possibilities going forward. No longer does Game Freak have to abide by the logic and canon set by previous generations. If they come up with a creative new idea, they can run with it, and nobody can ask, why wasn't there something in Kanto or Johto? Because multiverse, that's why. All I'm saying is, if you like Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, you better thank Gen 6. This was also the generation that truly refined the online experience. The PSS, to this day, still hasn't been topped as the best multiplayer channel in the series, which I'm not quite sure is a good thing. Wonder Trading and Wonderlocks became a thing, all the new shiny hunting methods made an extremely popular streaming activity, and Wi-Fi battles have never been easier to set up. If there's one thing Generation 6 prioritized over all else, it was making the player base and online community more interconnected than ever before. Speaking of online battles, I haven't even mentioned how influential so many of this generation's Pokemon were. Talonflame, Aegislash, Mega Rayquaza, the Primals, these were all huge forces across multiple different formats. I know a lot of you VGC players used to, and probably still do, hate Xerneas, but you can't deny it was influential. And both in battle as well as outside the games, Greninja has been an incredibly powerful presence since its introduction. Getting into Smash Bros., being voted the most popular Pokemon multiple times, he's pretty much Charizard for Zoomers. Easily the most iconic Pokemon of the last decade. And expanding our scope even further, these were the first games to make simultaneous worldwide releases the norm. Junichi Masuda claims that this is the reason why the games were called X and Y. They represented the intersection of the lives of all the people across the world, no matter which axis they're on. Because although the x-axis and the y-axis are both infinitely large, they eventually intersect at the point called the origin, and for Pokemon fans, that origin point was October 12th, 2013. Okay, I know that sounded mad goofy, but I promise I didn't make that up. That was the actual reason. On October 12th, 2013, we could all experience a new Pokemon adventure at the same time for the first time. As a result of all of this, Generation 6 reinvigorated a declining Pokemon community and is one of the few generations to outsell the generation that came before it. It's worth noting that this same ideology went on to inspire Pokemon Go, which despite coming out in 2016 is technically a Generation 6 spin-off, and it would be a worldwide phenomenon that propelled Pokemon back into the mainstream. Even now, it still feels like we're living in a Pokemon renaissance, as the games are the most popular they've been since the 1990s. Not to mention, other features introduced in Gen 6 have been remodeled and passed on, such as Pokemon Ami, which later became Pokemon Refresh in Gen 7, and Pokemon Camp in Gen 8. According to Junichi Masuda, trainer customization was a feature that was originally supposed to be exclusive to Kalos due to the region's emphasis on fashion, but after proving itself as one of the most loved new features, it has now become a staple in newer generations. As mentioned earlier, Wonder Trading was introduced, which has also passed the test of time, although just barely in the case of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. And outside the games themselves, this is where we first saw the introduction of subscription-based storage services like Pokemon Bank to seamlessly move Pokemon up from one generation to the next, removing the need for more clunky and outdated transfer methods like PAL Park and the Poke Transfer Lab. Of course, not all influences from this generation are exactly positive things. Clearly, a paradigm shift occurred in Game Freak Studio where they believe that in the current day online landscape where things move so much faster than before, that these games shouldn't occupy a lot of time and the devs should just move on to the next project as soon as possible. Outside of literal direct evidence from interviews, we can see this through how much less post-game content there's been in the 3D era, the revamp and later permanent integration of the EXP share, and of course the blistering pace that these games have been releasing at, with a new major project coming out every year since 2016. And we probably would have had another Kalos game in 2015 if the studio wasn't scrambling to release multiple projects during the 20th anniversary. I will say that one positive of this approach is that since Gen 6 competitive Pokemon has become more and more accessible, the devs finally seem to realize, hey, maybe these kids don't want to throw away their young lives breeding for a 6 IV Adamant Chimchar with Iron Fist. Maybe that process could be a tiny bit faster. Regardless, this is certainly an approach that over time has led to a lot of controversy in the Pokemon community, as the games are appearing to become less and less polished. So for the sake of this video, I'll just say that regardless of your thoughts on Pokemon's current pace and whether or not you like it, it's undeniable that Gen 6 is when the dial got cranked up to 11. But that was certainly all part of the plan. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Gen 6 was less about creating something for that time, rather it was for laying the foundation down for the future of the series to progress at a far faster rate. The ultimate tragedy of this is that it leaves Gen 6 as one of the less memorable generations in the minds of many fans. Now the current games are reaping the benefits of the seeds that were sowed by the company's hard work back in 2013. With all that being said though, it's very possible that Pokemon is about to reach its most influential generation yet with Generation 9. And I guess you could technically say this transition started in Gen 8, as Pokemon Legends Arceus certainly seems to be the basis that Gen 9 and the possible extensive future of the franchise is being built upon. As we inch closer to a truly open-world experience, we are about to undergo the biggest formula change in the history of Pokemon. Sounds a bit dramatic when I say it like that, but in reality it's a really low bar. In a way, I almost feel like Gen 8 went through the same tragedy that Gen 6 did. It's clear that this is where the real blueprint for open-world Pokemon started, even if it wasn't fully realized here. And of course, having to cut a substantial amount of Pokemon from the game starting with Sword and Shield will always be a massive black eye on this generation. It was a sacrifice that we saw no real immediate benefits from. But just like how Gen 6 did the heavy lifting for the future, I'm optimistic that starting in Gen 9, we may get to see some of those benefits from Gen 8's sacrifice. After all, we know that originally it was intended for all the Pokemon to be in Gen 8, which I'm sure ate up some of the dev time. But Generation 9 will be the first generation designed from the ground up intended to have a smaller selection of Pokemon. But I digress. I just wanted to highlight some of the parallels that I drew between Gen 6 and Gen 8 while brainstorming for this video. At any rate, at least for the time being, I do think that Gen 6 is likely the most influential Pokemon generation, for better and worse. But I want to hear what you have to think. Do you agree that Gen 6 is the most influential generation? Do you think that Gen 9 will be even more influential? Leave a comment with your thoughts down below. But while you're down there, don't forget to hit the like button, it really helps me out, and subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you guys next time.